Se preparem para este episódio, vocês terem um convidado alemão que, além de fitness model, ou seja, modelo fitness, ser um pesquisador científico nesta área nossa de hipertrofia e nutrição, com diversas análises sistemáticas, meta-análises, enfim, o cara é muito pica em análise de informação, porque ele trabalhava com isso e agora ele veio para este meio e se dedica o seu tempo para trazer afirmações. Confesso que vocês vão ver coisas que que diferem bastante da nossa, então é legal vocês também ouvirem este lado onde ele traz, de novo, análise científica, não só apenas de um estudo, mas de vários estudos, e que nós estamos super ok e abertos a isso. Fico feliz que talvez a opinião dele em relação a treino não difere tanto assim do nosso, mas existem diferenças, e cabe a você ouvir este episódio e tirar as suas conclusões. Então, mais uma vez, a gente trazendo aí um participante de fora com muito conhecimento para vocês, e assim vocês podem ver que talvez o nosso método não é assim tão fora ou além do que de fato está colocado aí no consenso científico. Não percam por esperar. Menno Henselmans com vocês. Sejam muito bem-vindos a mais um episódio do Híbrido Podcast. Hoje nós estamos com um convidado mais do que especial, que é especialista no ramo de pesquisas, todas relacionadas à hipertrofia, o que realmente de fato funciona, o que é balela. Ele é alemão, mas mora em Portugal, entende muito português, mora em Lisboa agora, e é um prazer trazer uma pessoa com tanta relevância assim no meio de pesquisa, né, científica, para esses assuntos que a gente traz aqui para vocês. Ele é uma das nossas referências, uma das nossas fontes onde a gente vai buscar estudos. Então ele traz isso de uma forma muito fácil. Então vocês vão conhecer aí o Menno Henselmans, que é o nosso convidado de hoje. Menno, such a pleasure to have you here in our first season of this podcast, bringing such a heavy figure like you in our
setting, in our environment.
Yeah, in our environment. So I'm really grateful. Thank you for your participation.
My pleasure, man. Let's get into it.
Só para eles entenderem que você fala português, fala só um pouquinho, porque a galera do Brasil vai ficar feliz.
Só um pouquinho. Só falei um pouquinho, assim. Me confundo muito com espanhol agora, e coisas que como hipertrofia é difícil demais.
Yeah?
Yes, perfect.
That's good.
That's
Menno,
awesome.
if you could give us your elevator pitch, just for us to know you and our audience to know who are we going to talk with.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I am an exercise scientist. I do scientific research for a couple institutes. I'm an advisor for Institute of Nutrition and Fitness Sciences in India, a few other companies. I'm a reviewer for the University of Cambridge Society of Reach-I. We're doing a project to help underrepresented students do more, publish high-quality research. I own a PT certification company in various languages, not Portuguese yet, but maybe in the future, where we educate people on how to become good evidence-based personal trainers. So I think largely the topics that we're going to discuss today: how to build muscle mass and strength effectively, how to lose fat, and in general live a healthy lifestyle.
Thank you so much. We are looking forward to it.
So let's start. I don't know if you saw it. There was a special in 60 Minutes about obesity that made the rounds, and there was a doctor there that made a claim that caloric intake, it's not relevant to obesity, and there was a social construct, and nowadays everything's a social construct, and the way power knowledge is playing a role in society, it's making the rounds. So I want to see your take on that. the scientific consensus when it comes to caloric restriction, and where did that lead us in terms of weight reduction or weight gain?
Yeah, there are kind of two sides to this argument, but physically, things are very clear. Physically, we know exactly how the laws of thermodynamics work. You have a certain energy intake, you have a certain energy expenditure. The difference between those is how much your body stores or how much your body has to burn. These things are based not just in research sciences, but even a higher level of facts, namely physics. So these things are not disputable anymore. Anyone who claims that calories don't matter or that how much fat you gain is not related to your energy intake, that is 100% quackery. It's just absolute nonsense. But in devil's advocate, so if I have to justify the argument that she gave to some extent, it is true that if you look at heritability studies, we see a large genetic component or a large heritable component of obesity. And it's not just your energy intake, but it's also your activity level, your willpower, your motivation to exercise, your motivation to lose fat, your preferences for how lean you want to be. All of these things have a genetic component. So it's relatively easy to say, yes, we can explain a lot of these things by genetics, but it actually doesn't change anything in terms of the individual, in terms of what you can do action-wise. Like, if I want to lose weight, I just have to lower my energy intake to below my energy expenditure. I will end up in energy deficit. The difference between that, my body has to burn. And then if you do resistance training, you make sure that the body preferentially burns fat rather than lean body mass. And that's how you get leaner. So none of these things of genetic studies change anything about the practical implication that everybody can get lean. You can get as lean as you want, but it gets progressively more difficult. You have to invest progressively more into your dieting skills, exercise, all of these things. But if you want to do that, everybody can get lean. Everybody. That's just physics.
I think the problem nowadays, I don't know what you think about it, is you can find data to support any claim. And what I saw her doing was very tricky, because whenever the interview would ask, but all we know is that exercising and eating right and dieting, she wouldn't use the term caloric deficit or anything like that. But if you eat less and exercise more, you're going to lose weight. Isn't that the case? And she would say no. And then she would give data. Do you know that 70% of kids that are born in an overweight family are going to have obesity too? And then she would nitpick information and make it seem to a huge audience of 60 minutes that obesity is a problem of more of a social fact than anything else.
Than physics.
I don't know if you
Than the
did you see this way, and what do you think about this data picking that you see a lot?
Yeah, I think the problem is that she thinks that the social arguments counter the physical reality of weight loss, and that's not the case. Like I said, if you want to lose weight, you can try this yourself. This is very easy to prove. If you get low enough in energy intake and you do things well, you will lose fat. It's physical law. It's going to happen. However, if you want to look at social studies, we can see that, yes, most people, your environment has a big influence. If everyone around you is also exercising, then of course we see that on average, people that are surrounded by people that exercise, people that are lean, are also much more likely to exercise and want to be lean. Whereas if all of the people in your surrounding, all they do is fit shame you, and they tell you, don't exercise, don't be too much, you're already too skinny, then of course you're less likely to exercise, less likely to restrict your energy intake. And then as a result of that, we see that, those people are not going to be as lean on average. But it's because the social factors change their behavior. And your behavior determines whether you get lean or not and what your body fat percentage is.
And I heard once even Mike Zeitel talking about the best way for you not to have problems is not to get obese in first place. Because once you reach this point, the way you're going to change the chemistry in your body, it's for good. Things are going to happen from then on, and you're going to struggle much higher to get back to
On
where you
inner
were.
place.
In the other episode, we discussed about set point of body fat and about the two ways that people used to see it. Like it's more a point, and then no, it's more like a range that your body likes to stays at. Could you explain a little bit better this set point of body fat and not being a point itself, but more like a range that above this range, leptin, ghrelin start changing, and at a very low range, it's going to happen the same.
The original set point theory is now, I would say, largely debunked, meaning we know it's not true. The original theory said that you have kind of like a thermostat in your body, where your body just says, you know, your set point is like 15%. And then if you go over that or under that, your body just wants to push you back in that direction. And we now know there isn't anything in the body that says, okay, you are going to be 15%. It's not like there's a part in your brain, you know, and it's encoded. It says, okay, 15%, that's it for this guy. We're not going to let him get any leaner. It doesn't work like that. But what we do see is equilibrium effects. And your lifestyle, your activity level, your food choices, so basically your energy expenditure and your energy intake, these factors determine what body fat percentage you end up at. And if you don't change your broad lifestyle, then you're going to end up back at that same level, because you're going to gravitate back to the same bad habits, the same food choices that you had before. If you see a period of dieting as, you know, an 8-week period of suffering to get abs for the summer, and after that, you go back to your former lifestyle, you stop exercising, you go back to the food choices you had before, you stop going to work by bicycle, and you get back to your car, all of these things, then you're going to get back to the same body fat percentage you were before, because now your exercise, your energy intake, and your energy expenditure are back to where they were before. So you're going to get back to the same result. Or if you change your lifestyle, so you're going to exercise more, eat less, and in particular, reduce your energy intake, because you don't have to actually eat less food, then you're going to end up at a lower point. And if you make these changes as sustainable lifestyle changes, then your new equilibrium point, some people like the term settling point, I personally think that's only confusing, is going to end up lower. So you can be, for me now, it's relatively easy to stay in between 10 and 15%. 10% requires some effort, but not a lot for me, because I formed good habits. I have good food choices. I'm always going to the gym multiple times in a week. So these things are never going to change for me. Even if I go on a holiday, I'm still going to have these general good habits. I'm still going to get my vegetable in. I'm going to get my protein in. Going to have high fiber diet. All of these things are ingrained for me. So I can stay at 10% body fat as long as I want, and it's not very effortful. But if you don't make these sustainable lifestyle changes, then it's going to be very difficult not to yo-yo diet back to where you were before you started the diet.
So that makes a link with the behavior that you're saying, like, okay, the environment and the changes that you made,
Your lifestyle.
your lifestyle are going to completely influence on you losing weight, getting fit or not.
Or sustain that
But
weight.
what is the component of genetics when it comes to it? Because you see that some people, they do not struggle. Like you were saying, at 10%, okay, I understand the social side of Menno's at 10%, but genetic-wise, what is the role of genetics at Menno's at 10% not struggling?
Well, there are a lot of factors that determine that. And in terms of the physics, the genetic component is actually not that large. I think almost 95% of the population in resting energy expenditure is within about 500 calories. Like the actual difference in like your resting energy expenditure is not that large. Most of the difference between individuals we can attribute to your exercise habits, your activity level. And there we see a lot more variance because some people are much more active than others. And in terms of energy intake, we also see huge variance. Some people eat a lot more than others. Now, genetically, there are two factors that play a big role in how easy it is for you to get to a low body fat level. And that is, well, for one, your energy expenditure. But like I said, the genetic variance in that is actually not that big. I mean, it's clearly significant, but it's not the way most people portray it. I think in popular media that, some people have an exercise expenditure. If they just sit on the couch, they're going to burn 5,000 calories, and other people only burn 1,000. That is extremely rare. Most people are in a relatively narrow range. And the second component is how high your appetite is. That is, in large part, genetic. Some people have a higher appetite than others. I personally have a very high appetite. And that means that it's more difficult for me than for someone that is otherwise the same as me, but has a lower appetite. But you can counter that very effectively because there are many, many strategies you can use. Like I just listed some already: high fiber intake, high protein intake, cognitive behavioral therapy methods, good habits, consistent eating patterns, all of these things, low energy density food choices, all of these things help fill up your appetite, basically. That's how I think you should see it. Everyone has a certain amount of appetite, like a certain amount of appetite units, and you have to fill those up, because if you don't, you're going to be hungry. Now, you can choose to just rely on sheer willpower, but for most people, that's not sustainable. So for most people, you just have to figure out how to at least fill most of those appetite units up so that you're not hungry. And when you're not hungry anymore, it's just a decision of, am I going to eat or not? That's personal preference. Because if you don't have hunger, then that's literally all it is. It's just a decision.
So I always like to think that nutrition is an exchange game. If you're trying to focus on something, you need to let go from something else. And I see people focusing a lot. Like, let's say I'm going to start a diet, getting to the gym. First thing, supplements. I need to get my whey protein. I need to get my creatine. Then I need to focus on the specific kind of foods that I'm going to eat. Then after that, how many times I'm going to eat. And then in the end, it's like, okay, what are carbs, fat, and protein, and how much I'm going to eat? So for you, in terms of body composition, what is the pyramid, and what are the percentage, and what role does it play to body composition itself?
Yeah, in terms of the relative contributions of the things you mentioned, how important they are, the pyramid of how you say many people do it, and what scientific research shows how important things are, is almost the exact opposite. So your energy intake is by far the biggest determinant. So you can have a crappy diet and your life is just super irregular, but if you just get your energy intake low enough, you're gonna lose fat. There's a famous case study of some professor that did a Twinkie diet. He basically ate only candy and then took a multivitamin pill or something, and he lost, a lot of weight. He just did it to prove a point that even if you have a very unhealthy diet, as long as you eat a low enough energy intake, then you will get lean. And that's how the physics work.
Yeah.
So in practice, though, it is very difficult because he was probably hungry a lot of the time, and he was just doing it to prove his point. But it's highly unlikely that he was going to sustain that for 10 years. It's much easier when you have a good diet, high protein intake, lots of fruits and vegetables, or generally high fiber intake, because then you're not going to be hungry, you're going to be well satiated, you're going to feel much better. So it's going to be much easier for you to get and stay lean.
So for you to, you said plenty of times, if you want to keep like a low body percentage at a healthy level, you should get your protein, high fiber, low dense foods, and exercise. Like, at least how many times you would say for training, like to keep the muscle mass and also being lean and healthy? Because a lot of people think that to get lean, you get like a crappy diet, like a really plain diet. How do you say that?
Yeah, a crappy diet. It's definitely not necessary to eat food with no taste.
Yeah.
We can get into that in a bit, but to come back to the hierarchy, supplements and all of these things, they matter to the extent that they influence your energy intake or your energy expenditure. And supplements, they typically don't matter much at all. You're going to have very, very small effects on either your energy intake or your energy expenditure. So these things just don't matter that much compared to what you eat. And again, what you eat in principle doesn't matter, but in practice it does, because it makes it much easier to lower your energy intake, even though theoretically your energy intake, your energy expenditure are all that matters. Exercise is not necessary, but it helps a lot. In particular, strength training. research actually finds, as nicely illustrated by a meta-analysis by Clark in 2006, I think, he showed that per minute of exercise, strength training, so resistance training, going to the gym, lifting weights, is more effective than cardio, than aerobic training to lose fat. And that's because it helps you retain muscle mass or even build muscle mass, which is going to increase your energy expenditure rather than make you lose muscle mass during the diet, and you're going to decrease your energy expenditure. There's also some research that resistance training is more effective to suppress your appetite than lower intensity forms of training. And there's also some research that the energy expenditure from strength training is purely additive. This is a more advanced topic, but there's some research that low intensity training has diminishing returns to your energy expenditure. It seems that if you do a lot of exercise, like hours of exercise a day for most people, like or multiple hours of cardio per week, then you're not going to increase your energy expenditure as much as you would think based on how much exercise you do. It seems that the body will decrease your energy expenditure at other time points.
So if we're going to focus on the caloric intake, because this is like what matters the most for body composition, and you already talked about ways of mitigating the hunger effect. I don't know if you obviously heard about it, Ozempic. And in Brazil, just information for you, you don't need a prescription to get one. So you just go to the pharmacy, you say you want it, and that's it. That's all it takes. So it became like a fever in Brazil using the medicine. But the problem is they are using it focusing on losing weight, and they are losing weight. But when you say losing weight is misleading because people think, oh, I'm going to be jacked. And I think most of the studies showed that without changes in diet and utilizing resistance training, you're going to lose a lot of muscle. So what can you add when it comes to that and what the research is showing?
That's right. If you don't perform resistance training, or you don't exercise in general, then about 25% of your body weight loss during a diet is going to be lean body mass, which is going to decrease your energy expenditure and make it more and more difficult to lose more fat. Moreover, you're obviously not going to look as good, assuming at least you like to look fit, because you're losing muscle mass during the diet. That's why strength training is incredibly important to make sure that you're losing fat rather than muscle. And that's also beneficial for fat loss, because if you have a 500 calorie deficit and your body spends, say, 125 calories of that to burn muscle mass, then that's 125 calories that your body is now not burning from fat. Whereas if you do strength training and the whole 500 calorie energy deficit your body will burn from fat, you also lose more fat as a result of that.
It's almost like a compound tax on your body, on your fat loss.
So going deeper now when it comes to caloric surplus or deficit, which are the numbers that you usually recommend for someone that wants to gain weight after he set his maintenance and to lose weight? Like, what is the added calorie and reduced calorie and the adjustments that you usually recommend to lose or to gain?
All right, let's start with bulking or the energy surplus.
Perfect.
For natural trainees, the ideal energy surplus that you want is very low. Most research finds that when you get into positive energy balance, there is a certain amount of energy that the body will use for muscle growth. After that point, most of the excess energy intake is going to be fat gain, because there's only so much muscle that you are going to build. I mean, if you logically think about it, the net metabolizable energy density of lean body mass is 1,825 calories or something. And that's for a whole kilo of lean body mass. Well, if you're lucky, if you're doing things well, as in you're not a novice anymore, you're gonna build maybe a kilo of muscle in a month. But you can just do the math, 1,800 divided by 30. That's how much energy the body can actually store effectively as muscle. So you're talking about a very small energy surplus. And most studies that have looked at different rates of weight gain, they find that the slower rate of weight gain builds almost as much muscle and the faster rate of weight gain just makes you gain more fat. So for most people, it's going to be an energy surplus that's either very small, 10% max, 5% is a decent guideline for many people. But it's much more important to monitor your progression, monitor some source of fat gain, like with skin fold calipers or your waist circumference, monitor your weight and your strength progression in the gym. And then you have an idea of how much fat to weight you're gaining. So if you're gaining lots of strength, your waist is not getting any bigger, and your weight gain rate is pretty high, well, that's great. You're building mostly muscle mass. And if you see, well, I'm going to add some more calories, and it's not really improving your strength progression, and now you see that your waist circumference is going up a lot faster, then you know, okay, I'm mostly getting extra fat now. So the monitoring of your results at the individual level is extremely important, because different individuals differ in how much muscle they can build, in particular because of how advanced they are. The more advanced you are, the more difficult it is to build more muscle mass. And people also differ a lot in terms of how their metabolism adapts. So some people have a much more adaptive metabolism than others. And as a result, when they gain muscle mass and they go into energy surplus, their metabolism just goes all the way up. And other people, their metabolism doesn't change that much. So they don't need as many adjustments.
And when it comes like to, because
I'll
that's
be more
curiosity.
conservative
Yeah.
in my next surplus.
That's a curiosity that I have, because we went through one and we had skin in the game when it comes to that. And I want to understand like what happens to you when you do it. There is the whole P ratio debate and the starting point of your body fat percentage, and how does that influence during your bulking phase, if it's better to start lower or if it starts bigger, doesn't matter that much. But when it comes to the end result, what is something that a natural athlete can expect in terms of P ratio at a very conservative bulking, like best case scenario and medial case scenario in terms of P ratio fat muscle?
If you do everything perfectly, you can gain almost pure muscle mass. However, in practice, that is very difficult, because many people get stuck either at maintenance and then just nothing happens, or they overshoot and they bulk too fast, or they dreamer bulk. Even if you try to lean bulk, it's difficult to hit that sweet spot perfectly. Sometimes you're going to overshoot, sometimes you're going to undershoot. Also, your energy intake, your energy expenditure are not going to be exactly the same every day. So, you're going to hover a little bit around that. You're never going to be at like a robot at the exact sweet spot and then be there for 3 months, just adjusting your energy intake exactly in line with your energy expenditure. So in practice, 50% muscle to 50% fat is very reasonable. I think you can do it a little bit leaner, but as like a good ballpark rule of thumb, 50-50 muscle to fat is quite realistic for more advanced trainees. Beginners, they don't need to gain that much fat. More advanced trainees, they will, just because it's so hard to build muscle. And if they stay at maintenance, nothing happens anymore.
So for people to understand, because I know you have a lot of skin in the game, because not just a scientist, but you go through this process. And if people see you online, you get like super shredded and you have times that you're bigger. What was the best bulk that you did in terms of, okay, this was the beginning with that much body fat. That was my maintenance. That how much I added for that long.
One of the better bulks was actually probably one of the last ones I did, which was around pandemic, mostly during the pandemic and starting a little bit before the pandemic started. I lean bulked with a ratio of about 6-1. So I only cut about 1 per 7 months. So 6 months bulking, 1 month cutting pretty much was the ratio. I bulked really slowly. And I think that's the only time in the last like 5 years that I actually gained a little bit of net muscle mass.
But when you say slowly, so like you're adding how many calories?
Like 50 to 100 at a time.
Oof,
yeah. So basically my weight gain rate was like
the scale would even tell it.
Yeah, the scale, I would have to look at the weekly average and I'd see like 0.1% weight increase. And then when I completely plateaued, it was like exactly 0, just hovering around the same level. Then I would add 50 to 100 calories, usually 50 to start with. And if I increased my energy expenditure, I would add like 100. So very, very slowly. And yeah, that was a very successful bulk. Before that, one of the biggest mistakes I definitely made in my career was bulking and cutting too aggressively. And there were a couple of years where I just ended up at the exact same spot, because during the bulk, I would gain too much fat. And then during the cut, I was like, let's get this over with. And I would just crash diet. And I lost muscle. So in the end, I had to spend a lot of time cutting to get rid of the fat from the bulk. My P ratio during both was not ideal. And as a result, in the end, I kind of got back at the exact same level. And I looked at my photos and my measurements after a year. And I was like, damn, I bulked, I cut, but I'm back at the exact same point.
We are the same. I am the same, Natty, here, the same problem. And on which period do you increase this, like 50 and 100 calories is like an apple a day? Like, okay, I'm going to increase this one apple a day and that's my bulk. Mm-hmm. That's really crazy. Like, it's nice to hear that, because I can open my mind to new possibilities.
But do you agree, like the 0.25% in average a week for an advanced trainer that is natural is a good rate for you to try in body weight increase?
Yeah, that's like 0.2 to 0.3% body weight. That's very reasonable, I would say, in general. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So that was one thing that was like crossing my mind, how to do a good bulk and how to keep it.
My bulk.
And right after the bulk, how long would you ask the person to try to maintain the weight before start cutting, in order for the body to adjust and to like, okay, this is my new body weight, this is my new metabolic rate, this is the muscle that I'm gonna keep?
So I actually don't recommend any maintenance phase.
Oh my gosh,
There was one study on diet breaks. Yeah, there was one period on diet breaks where they looked at the effect of adding a maintenance phase, and it did basically nothing. And in our paper on metabolic damage, that we did an extensive review of how your metabolism adapts to weight loss. And we also found that it basically doesn't matter whether you stay there or you go aggressively to a new point. All that matters is current energy intake, current energy expenditure. And of course, you do want to solidify your habits, your food choices, your routines, so lifestyle changes. But at the physical level, it doesn't matter if you have a maintenance phase or not. Your body doesn't need any time to adjust. It does that extremely rapidly, like thyroid hormone, leptin, all of these things. They respond to cumulative energy balance. So literally one day at lower energy intake, you can already see a difference. One day higher carb intake, you will see an increase in leptin. So your body responds pretty much this acutely. And even if you stay at, there was one study that looked at maintaining a weight loss level for, I think, a year, and they found no further change in their metabolism. So their metabolism stayed suppressed. And if you get to a low, very low body fat level, then your metabolism is going to be a lot lower than it was when you were at a higher body fat level. Just like when you get overweight, your energy expenditure actually goes up a lot. And the more overweight you get, the more your energy expenditure increases typically. So these things work both ways. And there's nothing like metabolic damage or anything that has a timing component in general. Your body is very simple or elegant in the sense of it only responds to what's happening right now.
So using the same logic, you would go straight from the end of a deficit to a maintenance phase. You wouldn't need the reverse dieting phase.
Yes, not only a maintenance phase, I have my clients and myself, I go straight into the bulk. Now, in practice, I often do end up at maintenance because you want to be a little bit conservative, because if say you dropped 5 kilos in weight and your energy intake now is also a lot lower, that means your energy expenditure is going to be a lot lower because of your lower body weight, the lower thermic effect of food. There's probably also your activity level might be lower because of, even subconsciously, due to a suppression of NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So your energy expenditure now, 5 kilos lighter than when you were bulking, is not going to be the same as when you were bulking.
Yeah.
And a big mistake I think that a lot of people make is when they go back to the bulk, they go right back to the level at the end of the bulk. And I can bulk on like 3,500 calories, close to 5,000 if I get to like 95 plus kilos. And I'm quite active. If I bicycle to the gym 20 minutes, 2 times, like in Brazil, Florianopolis, I lived there, and I would bicycle like a good 20 minutes over a very hilly terrain. My energy expenditure at the time was quite large, quite high. And then I can bulk on like 4,500 to 5,000 calories. Now, at the end of a cut, like a contest prep, where I do a photo shoot or a competition, I literally have to get down below 2,000 calories per day. So that's less than half of at the end of my bulk. Now, if at the end of my cut, I'm like, okay, now I want to start bulking. And I'm like, oh yeah, let's just go back to 5,000 calories per day. Then I get fat really quickly because my energy intake is going to be much higher than my energy expenditure at that point. So what I can do is I don't have to get to like 2,200 calories because I know nothing happens. I may even lose a little bit more fat depending on the specifics, but usually just nothing happens. So rather than go like 2,100, 2,200, 2,300, I usually go to 3,000, 3,500. And then I'm still often maintaining just because I want to be a little conservative. Probably I could go up to 36, 3,700 immediately if I wanted to. And after that point, I start monitoring, okay, am I gaining weight? And then I'm going to be gradual with like 50, 100 calorie.
So following what you're saying, it's like in the end, let's say in the end of the cut, you can start bulking, but start bulking means that you're going to go probably to maintenance and then it's going to start increasing little by little. So you're going to pass through maintenance because let's say you were at 2,000. The person is going to start bulk. What would you bump him? Like 500 calories, 250 calories?
I mean, that depends a lot on like how big is the guy or girl, and you know, what do I know about this person's history? Because if I know that they were bulking on 5,000 calories, then I have a good idea of how fast their metabolism is, right? And also based on where they currently are in the cut, if they're losing like 1% body weight per week on the 2,000 calories, then I know, okay, they're in a big energy deficit. So I can have a big increase in energy intake, and then they're still going to be at maintenance or surplus. But if they're like at 2,000 calories, let's say it's a female bikini competitor or a figure competitor, and almost nothing is happening anymore, then I know, okay, they're probably quite close to maintenance, so I have to be a lot more conservative. So the most important thing is what's currently happening to your body composition, and that tells you whether you are close to maintenance or if you're in a big deficit. And based on that, you can decide how much extra calories you're going to add.
But the same thing applies to the bulk. Like in the end of the bulk, if you're going to start the cut, you don't go from 5,000 to 2,000.
But I do a big decrease. I will
show an example of yourself, like the last one you did.
I usually go to below 3,000. If it's a mini cut, I will go straight to like 2,500 even. And then I will lose about 1% body weight per week for 2 weeks. And that's about as long as I can sustain that. Otherwise, I'm going to lose muscle. So after that, usually my metabolism also decreases and it kind of regulates itself. But I'm not going to go right back to 1,800 or 2,000. I usually get to somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 from the end of a bulk. So that's a big decrease, and I know exactly what will happen to my physique at those energy intake levels. But for a bulk, it's much easier for most people because if you're lean bulking at least, you know that you're not in a big energy surplus. Like nobody bulks at the 50% energy surplus, right? Some people cut at that energy deficit, but nobody bulks at an extreme energy surplus, or at least that's going to be one hell of a dreamer bulk that's going to get you really fat. So you know that you're going to be close to maintenance, and then it's relatively easy. If you know you're in 5% energy surplus, you want to be in a 20% energy deficit, then you can reduce energy intake by at least 25%. And I say at least because you know that your metabolism is going to slow down a bit when you make that change. So usually you can probably go down 30% at a minimum.
And when it comes, like we talked about the caloric side now and the macro distribution for body composition, especially in the bulk and in the deficit, what are the difference in terms of allotment to these calories to macros that you like doing it in order to see proper change in the body?
I actually don't make big differences in the distribution, or at least not like total protein intake. It still has to be enough in cutting or when bulking. And I think of fat and protein intake more as relative to body weight or to how much you need. Like fat intake, ideally I base it on like body weight, but we don't have that much data on it. So usually I will try to stay in the 20 to 40% of energy intake range. But if I don't have the calories and I'm cutting, then, fat intake may have to go lower than that. So typically I will err on the side of, I calculate based on someone's energy expenditure, based on someone's activity level, how many carbohydrates do they need, which is usually a lot lower than people think for bodybuilding purposes. How much protein do they need? I have a good article on that. And for most people, I think 1.8 gram per kilogram per day is more than enough. That's also what the latest meta-analysis that I co-authored found, and the latest meta-analysis on strength development even found 1.5 is enough.
Even on the deficit?
Yeah, there isn't much research on people in energy deficit, but all the research we have finds no difference. So in untrained individuals, we have very good research what looks at protein requirements in energy surplus versus deficit, and they find no change. So we don't have that research in strength trainees. There was one study not too long ago which found that per meal, the requirement doesn't change either, based on comparisons between energy deficit and energy surplus. So I don't think that it changes much. It's a popular opinion in fitness that you need more protein in energy deficit, but there's actually no good research to substantiate that. And all of the studies that we have on people that are in energy deficit, they still find that 1.8 is enough. So they don't find any benefits of conditions going higher than 1.8 compared to at that level already.
And do you have any data that when you're bulking, you can reduce a little bit protein in order to leave more side to carbs or fats? And would that be beneficial?
You could, but I wouldn't recommend it. If anything, you could make the argument that during a bulk, you can get higher levels of muscle protein synthesis. So you're going to build more muscle during a bulk than during a cut. So you should have maybe more protein, actually. And if you look at, this might be counterintuitive because a lot of people think that when you're cutting, you need to counter the protein oxidation. But most research finds that cutting actually doesn't make that much of a difference in protein breakdown rates. If you're in a mild energy deficit, protein breakdown rates may not go up at all. And what the body does is it's smarter than that. It just decreases the synthesis, which is of course much more efficient than slowing down or than changing the breakdown, because the body won't break down proteins that are still functional. Usually protein breakdown only occurs to remodel tissue. So if you want to get a bigger muscle, then it has to break down parts of the muscle, and then it can expound on that. Just like when you make a house bigger, you have to destroy some of the walls, destroy maybe the ceiling if you want to add a floor to it. You can't just build on, the rooftop, just leave it exactly as it is, and then build another part on top of that.
Makes sense. That's
okay,
cool. It's it's very
It's-
counterintuitive for us because we still apply these concepts. Like in a deficit, we are going to increase our protein intake. During our surplus, we are going to lower our protein intake to get more carbohydrates. It's crazy. It's cool to hear that from him.
And when it comes to that, because I think a lot of that is where scientific consensus is at the point that it is, like, okay, let's look into the data. Let's be able to look the data, because that's a point that I think a lot of fitness influencers and people cannot they just read the title of the study and they start already posting and commenting on that. How do you make decisions when it comes to that, and how hard it is to change your mind when it comes, because let's say there's a new study that shows the importance of increasing the protein. Would that change your mind, or it takes much more than that and a lot of studies when it comes to it?
Usually it's a gradual process, but I think most people change their mind too slowly based on new evidence. And there's also research on this in the psychological literature that shows that most people fudge it, as I think, what's it called? Daniel Aro, I don't know his name, but he calls it fudging it, where you have a certain belief and you think, for example, well, I'm going to need at least 500 grams of carbohydrate, otherwise I can't bulk. You can't gain muscle on less than that. And then their study comes out and says, well, actually, you don't even need 200. Then usually what happens is they're going to be like, well, okay, maybe it's not 500, maybe it's like 450. But almost nobody goes like, oh, well, actually the research shows I don't even need 200, so I'm going to go boom to 200. And this is actually also what happened with the scientific community when I started posting about protein content. One of the first articles that I wrote was about the optimal protein intake, one of the articles that may be well known. I basically looked at all the data that we had, and I said, okay, let's just forget what anyone says, and all we're going to do is we're going to look at the hard data that we have. And then we're going to see what's like the maximum point where we still see any benefits in the research. And that was 1.6 gram per kilogram per day, very, very consistently. And after that, Well, first, people are like, oh, okay, that's interesting. This guy has an interesting opinion. But almost nobody decreased their protein intake a lot. They were just like, oh, that's interesting, right? It became a super popular article. It was #1 on Google for many years. But it wasn't like people were like, oh, we're going to get rid of the high protein idea, 1 gram per pound. Most people were like, okay, I was actually going a little bit over 1 gram per pound. Now I'm going to go back to 1 gram per pound. So 2.2 gram per kilogram. And yeah, after that, there were multiple studies that again showed the same thing. We co-authored meta-analyses with some of the top minds in evidence-based fitness. And it found exactly, again, 1.6 gram per kilogram was the breakoff point for muscle growth. So research just confirmed and confirmed and confirmed exactly that level. I also co-authored another study where we looked at whether higher protein intakes were maybe beneficial for recovery after a workout rather than maybe muscle growth directly. And no, again, we found no effect. So research just kept coming in. And like I said, the latest meta-analysis of strength development even said 1.5. So it went a little lower rather than higher. And people have gradually been coming down a little bit in terms of protein requirements. And that goes very slowly. So most people, they don't change their opinion enough based on new evidence, I would say.
I even saw one of your studies that you put up on Instagram that showing there is not such a significant difference between like a low carb diet compared to a high carb diet in hypertrophy wise, like results. Could you tell us a little bit more about this study? How so? Like,
yeah, that was interesting because it's that's another example where we had a new study come in. And people were like, well, actually the low protein condition or the low carbohydrate condition wasn't that low because it was still, I think, 3.8 gram per kilogram or something. It was still what I would consider like probably medium carbohydrate. Although those terms don't matter. In studies, they just talk about the high and the low condition. It is all relative to that specific study, because there's one that is lower and one that is higher. And then they call that the low and the high condition. So in any case, that study is just one out of many studies that we already had, and I published a systematic review on. So I went through the entire literature and looked at all the studies that we have on different carbohydrate intakes, and I looked at how they influence your strength training performance. And we found that in the vast majority of studies, there is no significant difference. So even ketogenic diets perform as well for strength training as like high carb diets. And muscle growth, we also had I think 17 studies and 14 found no difference. And 3 of the studies where there was a difference, we could attribute that to the higher energy intake in the high carb group. So usually studies where they have higher carbohydrate intakes, they also have higher energy intake. And then it seems that it's the higher energy intake rather than the carbohydrates per se that actually make the difference. Because if you look at like how much carbohydrate do you actually need, studies find that even very intensive bodybuilder workouts, there have been some nice studies by Tesh et al., even back to the 80s and the 90s, where they looked at how much glycogen in the muscle do bodybuilders burn during a heavy workout of like 15, 20 sets per muscle group. And they found no higher values than 39%. And even the bodybuilders often only lost like 21%, 25% of their glycogen stores after a workout. And then it only takes a day or maybe a few days in extreme conditions, but usually only a day before you get back all of that glycogen. So unless you're training a body part like twice a day with 20 sets per week or per session, you simply don't need that much carbohydrate, and the body can resynthesize that quite well, even on a high fat diet.
So that puts like down the whole idea of what you can do in the anabolic window and how much carb you need before pre-workout. Like, what is your take when it comes to the anabolic window, and what would you say about it?
The anabolic window is something that also initially we thought of as what Alan Aragon calls the anabolic peephole, where we thought, or supplement manufacturers in particular, like to portray it as like 1 or 2 hours after the workout or before the workout. You have this small window of opportunity where you can gain a lot of muscle. You need to shove lots of carbs, lots of protein into the muscle, because your muscles are going to be like a sponge. And then actually it turned out that the anabolic window for most people lasts at least 24 hours, and in some cases more than 72 hours. So the process of muscle growth is the whole anabolic window, and it usually lasts a day or multiple days after a workout. So it's not necessary to gain like lots of carbs, lots of protein in the 1 or 2 hours after the workout. They have done a few studies now where they looked at exactly that, adding a lot of carbohydrates to your post-workout shake, and they find that there's no more effect if you get enough protein. So if you get like 40 gram protein after your workout, then adding carbohydrates to that, even very large amounts of carbohydrate, has no more further effect on increasing nitrogen balance or protein synthesis or decreasing protein breakdown. And also in long-term studies, we don't see any effects of such strategies for muscle growth.
But when it comes like to energy, would you say, let's say someone went to bed, the person woke up and he's going to do resistance training. Do you see any benefit of, like, do you have any problem on people doing resistance training on fasting, or you would not recommend this kind of approach?
I would not recommend fasted training. No, we know that you have quite some leeway with when you consume the meals. So it doesn't have to be like right after the workout, right before the workout. You can think of pre and post workout as more relative terms. So it's somewhere before the workout, somewhere after the workout. It doesn't have to mean that you get back into your locker room and you slam down a protein shake. Of course, supplement manufacturers would love that you believe these things, because if you have to consume it right after the workout, you don't really have an option other than some supplement, right? You can't really bring a steak and broccoli to the gym. I guess you could consume it cold or something, but most people don't do that. So if your pre and your post-workout meal are sandwiching your workout within about a 5-hour intermeal interval, you're generally okay. Basically, if this is your workout, then you don't want more than 5 hours between the meal before and after. So you can have like the meal before, directly before, and then the after a few hours later, or you can have your before a little bit earlier, a couple hours before the workout if you don't like training on a full stomach, and then you have your post-workout meal closely after the workout. But as long as the workout is kind of in the middle there, you're okay. Because it takes what you want to think of is, when are the nutrients in the blood? So when is there insulin elevation, blood sugar elevation, and elevation of amino acids? So when you have hyperaminoacidemia, hyperinsulinemia, and blood glucose levels are at least okay. Blood glucose levels don't matter that much. It's mostly about insulin. So if you look at the charts of that, if you have a meal, it's usually multiple hours. Insulin goes down a little bit quicker, but amino acids, after a good sized protein portion of a mixed meal or like casein, they are elevated for about 6 hours or more. So it's not necessary to, time the meal that, if you already have a big meal, for example, 2 hours before the workout, then you don't need another one right before the workout, because you still have the insulin and the protein, the amino acids from that meal, they're still in the blood. So even if you train fasted, for example, and you have your meal right after the workout, well, that's actually already too late, because by the time those nutrients get into the blood, we're talking about like at least an hour after the workout. And what you want, as soon as you have started the workout, and especially after the workout, you want your body to, especially the mTOR enzyme that looks at all the signals for muscle growth, you want it to see, okay, we have lots of amino acids, we have high insulin levels, we have a strong stimulus of mechanical tension in the muscle fibers that wants the muscles to grow. And based on those factors, the body essentially determines how much muscle we're going to build. So how much protein synthesis are we going to elevate? And if you have all of those factors in check, you're going to build a lot of muscle. And if you're training fasted and the body sees, okay, we don't have amino acids, insulin levels are relatively low, then it's not going to build as much muscle. And we don't have that many studies on fasted training, but the research we have typically finds that, yes, your performance might not be as good. Protein synthesis afterwards is not going to be as good. Muscle growth is probably going to be lower. Even there's one study which found that just carbohydrates, not even protein, but just carbohydrates before the workout resulted in an increase in muscle growth compared to training fasted. And they weren't even completely fasted. I think they were fasted for about 6 hours or something.
But so you believe that allocating more carbohydrates in this 5-hour window between your workout, it's a good idea,
I think you should have some carbohydrates. In our review paper, we recommended only 15 grams. That 15? Was actually basically the level where, just 15. We found no more further benefits after that. So you just want some carbs to elevate your insulin and your blood sugar a little bit. And beyond that point, all that matters is kind of your total carbohydrate intake and especially your total energy intake across the days as a whole. So after the workout, your glycogen stores are going to be depleted in the muscles that you exercised. And you only need that again when you're going to exercise those muscles again. So if you do like a standard bro bodybuilding workout where you have leg day once per week, then you only glycogen again a week later. So that's a lot of time. And when you consume the carbs exactly, it doesn't really matter in that window. It matters only when you have a very limited time between when you need the carbs again. So if you're like at the Olympics, you compete in the morning and again in the evening, then it's very important to have carbohydrates immediately post-workout. But for most people that just train to gain muscle, gain strength, and they go maybe once per day, but probably not even that, to the gym, the timing isn't that important.
But if you look like, can you finding data, or there's no data to support that allocating carbs closer to a workout would improve in terms of
performance?
No, like in terms of making sure the max amount is going to turn into muscle and not fat, or that when you're in a deficit, doing that would help you to preserve muscle, or is more the caloric intake in the end that is going to do that, or there is any data that support the whole anabolic window, or we can rest assured that that's not the main factor or would not contribute it to a big level.
Better results.
The data basically show for all results, for muscle growth, strength development, assuming somebody only does strength training, right? We're not talking about a tennis player or something. Then if you have at least 15 gram carbohydrates within, say, 1 or 2 hours before the workout, at least 0.3 gram per kilogram protein, so at least 20 grams for most people of high quality protein. You eat again within 5 to 6, let's say 5 hours after the pre-workout meal. Somewhere in between, you train, and your post-workout meal also has enough protein, usually at least 0.4, I would go 0.6 gram per kilogram protein, typically. Anything after that makes no more difference. It doesn't change. Well, a total energy intake does, but given the same protein intake and energy intake, even the total amount of carbohydrate doesn't matter, let alone when you time its carbohydrate intake.
So it wouldn't matter if you, like, let's say you're a person that feels hungry at night. You could eat most amount of your carbs and go to bed. And that itself would not be the reason why you're waking up fat, or not waking up fat, but with time getting fat.
Yes, there's even one study that found some benefits for fat loss of consuming most of your carbohydrates later in the day. It's Sofer et al., I think 2011, in the Israel police force. They looked at police officers that consumed most of their carbs either in the second half of the day, or people that distributed more equally or had more of their carbs in the first part of the day. They actually found that fat loss was a little bit, like a very little bit, better in the group that consumed most of their carbs later in the day. And they could attribute that mostly to slightly better diet adherence and lower appetite, because when you have most of your carbohydrates later in the day, it seems, based on at least that single study, that your leptin and adiponectin levels, which are appetite suppressive hormones, are more elevated during the day, because there's a delay between carbohydrate consumption and the elevation of those hormones. Whereas if you consume them in the morning, then you're going to have your appetite suppressing hormones active during the night, and when you're sleeping anyway, it doesn't matter if you're hungry. As long as you don't wake up from the hunger, you are fine. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you have your carbs early in the day, later in the day. If anything, maybe there's a slight advantage to having them later in the day. Again, given the same total energy intake and protein intake.
Okay, that was like really a whole change in paradigm when it comes to food, to timing, when it comes to nutrition. Timing food foods. Composition, if you would have to say like briefly, does it change the kind of foods that, let's say, more anecdotal evidence that you use when you are on a bulking versus the kind of food that you use when you're deep on a cut?
Very little. I mean, like I said, in practice, it matters a lot, because it's just really damn difficult to get to lower energy intakes if you're eating pizza and ice cream and you still want to get your protein in, right? It's like you're going to have 2 protein shakes and then a few slices of pizza. You're going to be super hungry. You're going to be feeling terribly because you don't have enough nutrients. You have lots of vitamin deficiencies. So, all of these problems aside, when you're bulking or when you're cutting, if you eat clean or dirty, makes very little difference. Now, it does make some difference because we know that it changes the thermic effect of food. And we know that generally more processed foods have a lower thermic effect of food, which means that, and this is also what I would say my clients is about what I can observe. If your diet is very clean, like you have mostly unprocessed foods, whole foods, more like paleo, you can have probably 5% more energy intake and get the same results because your energy expenditure is a little bit higher. Whereas if your diet is not as clean, so it's like more processed foods, more junk food, not as healthy, then you're gonna need to lower your energy intake a little bit more, maybe 5%, than if your diet was better.
So how can you give me an example when you were eating 5,000 calories or maybe 4,500?
What would be the menu of menus?
Because we know how hard it is to get that calories.
Seriously,
from
after
a clean
4,000, it starts becoming a profession.
How can you get cereal, some sugary thing?
What would be your menu on 5,000 calories?
Yeah, please.
Right. Yeah. I agree. After 4,000, it's fun for a couple days, and then it
it's
becomes a job.
It's a job.
Yeah. So, and I keep it super healthy because I don't want to introduce any junk food, any processed foods, because I know that I'm going to crave those foods then when I cut. So I keep things extremely legit and clean. That's just personal preference. Some people, they like to go a lot, they go dirtier. They're like, oh, I have the calories, now I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm more like a monk. I just keep it relatively plain. And I eat a lot of nuts, lots of nuts. And at some point when I go over 4,500, I usually have to resort to shakes. So I make these shakes with lots of peanut butter and then some whole milk, sometimes extra virgin coconut oil. I throw in a little bit of olive oil in almost anything, just enough that it doesn't ruin the taste, but it's super healthy. And a little bit of olive oil you typically don't notice. And yeah, you have these monster shakes of 1,500 calories. What I also like to do is get a dark chocolate bar, 100-gram dark chocolate, and then you put it in the microwave with hazelnuts, and then the chocolate melts over the hazelnuts, and now you have a hazelnut chocolate bar. Yeah, so it's it's gonna stick to the bowl. Yeah. So you need to basically get it out with a knife.
Don't say that. We are in a deficit now, man.
But that's that's 100 grams of hazelnuts and 100 grams of chocolate. That's 1,300 calories. And it's basically just a big chocolate bar.
Okay, so on your bulk, your fat intake is high, it's more than 100 grams.
What would be the macro breakdown, just for us to understand, in the 5,000 calories that you made?
I'm not actually sure. I think it's pretty equal. Protein is a bit low because my protein intake is probably 250 grams or so. So that's only 1,000. And then I have 1,500 to 2,000 calories of both carbs and fats. I think it's pretty equal because I think a lot of people think that when you get nuts and the you're going to be all fat, but even nuts still have quite some carbs.
Yeah.
And if I eat a shake, for example, or if I eat a peanut butter, I will eat it with bread. So you still have the carbs from the bread. And as a result, actually, my carbs and my fats often end up about equal.
I want to do this bulk next time.
Oh my gosh. That looks amazing when it comes to it. So you don't change a lot, the kind of foods that you eat throughout the cut or the bulk?
Oh, no, I definitely do, because I'm not going to cut on peanut butter sandwiches or chocolate bars. So I just keep them healthy. Right? So when I'm cutting, I have lots of vegetables, lots and lots of vegetables, lots of fruit. And so for example, how I change my meals is my starting meal of the day is almost always the same. It's almost always Greek yogurt with raspberries or some other fruit or berries.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then a lot of sweetener. I love sweetener. So sucralose. And that's just it for a cutting meal. And it's about 500 grams of both. So when I'm cutting, that's already a kilo of food. Very satiating. And not that many calories. And then when I'm bulking, I have the exact same meal. but I add a lot of almond crumble. So if you get like a lot of almond flour, you can also just add nuts or whatever you want. But if you get almond flour and you just bake it in a pan with a little bit of olive oil and medium amount of extra virgin coconut oil, then it becomes kind of almond crumble, like crunchy almonds. And I just put a bunch of that over the Greek yogurt. And that adds so many calories, and it's super good. It's super tasty. It's like, and a bit of sweetener as well, of course. It's like sweet almond crumble, basically. And you just add a little bit, and it's like 600 calories.
Yeah.
That looks good.
He added fat. Yeah, that's
just
cool.
because you are mentioning sweeteners, there was a new study. I saw even a video of Biolane talking about it that was like, oh, everything that you learn about sweeteners, now there is this new study, and he was like breaking down and showing how it's not really what it shows and how people gave importance to the fact. And even in my family group, people were sharing that and saying, see, it's linked to cancer. And I think his point was like, these people were very sick people to start with. So the markers that they found when it comes to sweeteners were not sweeteners dependent, was because they were like, they had heart attacks. They were
already in a bad
condition. So what is your take on sweeteners and how do we approach it?
Yeah, for one thing, I think that's the study you mentioned. I'm pretty sure it's the one on erythritol. And
yes,
almost nobody consumes erythritol. So most people consume aspartame and sucralose. I have a very detailed article on aspartame on my website, and sucralose is kind of the same story, where I show just how much research goes into the sweeteners and has proven that they are safe. Like governments have been looking at these compounds, and multiple agencies have been looking at these compounds for decades, many, many years. And time again, they have no choice but to conclude that they are safe. And then every time there's a single study that comes along and finds, well, maybe there are disadvantages of some sweetener, everyone's like, okay, we knew it all along. All sweeteners cause cancer. You're going to die super quickly if you have sweeteners. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have sugar, because at least I know for sure that's bad for me. It doesn't really make sense. But the erythritol study, it had major limitations. For one, it's erythritol, right? Nobody consumes erythritol. It's a sugar alcohol. The only reason you would consume that instead of sucralose or aspartame is because it has a texture more like sugar. Sucralose tastes like sugar, to a large extent, because it's a sugar metabolite, but it doesn't have the texture. You can't get that crunchy thing. And erythritol kind of has that, which is okay. Like on pancakes, that's basically the only scenario where I liked it. But you also get digestive issues if you have a lot of that. So sugar alcohols in general aren't as well established in terms of safety as sucralose and aspartame. Now, second, this was not a randomized controlled trial. They just looked at people that consumed, they didn't, that's the second thing. They just looked at people and see how much they developed complications. I'm not sure what they looked at. I think they looked at mortality, cardiovascular mortality, anyway, bad health conditions. And then they correlated that not with erythritol intake, which is what you would like to see, of course, but I think it was an erythritol metabolite in the body. And the thing is,
a marker. Yes.
Funny enough, our bodies also produce metabolite
the marker itself. Yes.
Jesus.
Yes, and the second thing is that it seems that certain health conditions increase our production of that health marker. So it actually makes sense that people that are super unhealthy have higher levels of that metabolite, and they are also unhealthier. So then you're going to see a correlation between that metabolite and unhealthiness. And that's basically all the study showed. I think they also had like a super short pilot and some animal data or something, but no like good randomized controlled trial data. So it wasn't even a particularly strong study or strong study at all. This is the type of study that should, in my opinion, just inform the need for a more controlled, well-established study to look at whether we do see these health effects in controlled conditions. But this study itself found, very little.
It's always like the relation is always gut health. Yeah, but I think we know so little about how it works nowadays. Like I even saw like a specialist saying, ask me in 10 years and I'll have a better answer for you. That was the answer that she gave, because it's such at the beginning of the scientific.
Huberman says the same.
When it comes to gut health. But does it have an effect on gut health?
Erythritol, definitely. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol, and pretty much all the sugar alcohols, you don't need a study to tell you. I can tell you, you're going to go to the bathroom and you're going to find out for yourself. It has digestive effects. So, these things are not like sucralose, where on sucralose, most studies also find no effect or they do find no effect on digestive conditions or gut microbiome, how much bacteria there are, etc. And the difference is that we know sucralose is basically not metabolized in the body. It just passes through. And aspartame is metabolized and broken down into compounds that you also find in food like tomatoes and amino acids. So it makes sense that aspartame almost cannot adversely affect our health function, because any effect that aspartame would have, you would also see that in tomatoes and high protein foods.
So you're saying like sucralose and aspartame is like the best choices for sweeteners?
I would say so, yes. And the only big difference is that sucralose tastes a bit more like sugar, and sucralose also is resistant to heat. So you can bake with sucralose, which to me means that most people should just use sucralose. And aspartame is mainly useful in diet drinks, where they usually combine it with acesulfame potassium, and then that's safe. You just need to know that it's safe, and at the very least, it is much, much better than sugar. That's I think the point where people just completely go wrong in an illogical direction. Where if you're gonna not consume sweeteners, okay. For example, I had one client, Nina Rose. She became IFBB Bikini Pro, got European titles. Her diet was as clean as it gets. So she was extremely legit with her diet, with her training, and she was even healthier than I am. Like, she had zero leeway. She would not eat anything that's not healthy. And in her case, I also first designed a meal plan for her and I had sweeteners. And she was like, okay, I'm going to eat that meal plan, but I'm going to not have the sweeteners. And in that case, okay, I can understand that, right? If you just want zero risk, you don't want to consume anything that might have detrimental effects on your health, and you think of food as just fuel, you don't care that it's not as tasty, I understand that. That's logical. But if you're going to say aspartame is, the devil, it's going to cause cancer, I'm not consuming aspartame, but then in the same breath, you're going to go to McDonald's or you're still consuming sugar, that makes no sense, right? Yeah. These sweeteners are just extremely low for most people on the list of things that they possibly have to worry about. Like, as a guy, if you don't have visible abs and you're worried about aspartame, your priorities are probably not where they should.
Yeah, it's super off. But like here in Brazil, like the nutritionists, all the doctors, the medical
good
side,
health, microbiome,
they like demonize so much sweeteners. Like,
okay, so just to close, let's say, the nutrition pyramid, when it comes to supplements, what it's on your list and what you don't even look at?
Not much. Creatine is pretty much as good as it gets, and you can just get good old creatine monohydrate, and it has some effect. Some people are non-responders, so even creatine doesn't do anything, which sucks. I'm a non-responder myself. And
really, you can take and nothing happens?
No, I don't see any increase in my weight. Well, nothing happens. So for one, I don't notice any difference also in digestive symptoms. I don't need an increase in water intake. Typically, the three conditions that I look at in a client, if they respond well to creatine, is usually the three things they complain about the most, which is, or at least two of them. So if you see your weight go up, when you supplement creatine, you load creatine and you see your weight go up. This is also why I like loading, because you get a better idea quickly of whether it's working. And if you see your weight go up, that means it's probably working. And if you feel an increase in thirst, like you have higher water requirements, or you get dehydrated or something, that's also a good sign, because that means the creatine is sucking water into your muscles. And that's what you want. It literally makes them bigger. So, and it looks like muscle. I mean, technically it is muscle. It's lean body mass. It happens to be water, but it also makes you stronger. So don't complain. And the next thing is an increase in work capacity. So typically, if you go on creatine, you would see that your reps, they go like, instead of the normal 10, 8, 6, they might go like 10, 9, 7 or something, or 10, 8, 7. There's just a small increase, especially in the later sets, that your repetitions stay a little bit higher. If you see those signs, that's a good indication that you respond well to creatine. If you see absolutely nothing, typically to clients, I tell them just supplement it anyway, because it's as far as supplements go, as good as it gets. Yeah, exactly. And it's cheap, or it used to be cheap at least. So yeah, if you're not happy with creatine, then you're not going to be happy with anything else pretty much. Anything else is just, nutrient deficiencies, vitamin D, fish oil if you don't consume fish, those kind of things.
Awesome.
Whey protein if you don't have enough protein and you want something.
Exactly. It all depends on your diet. You can cover dietary deficiencies, but there's nothing that, like creatine, you just completely add to the diet and it makes things better.
BCAA, any use? None?
No, because they're in your diet. Literally one of the requirements of a high quality protein source is that it has the requisite amounts of branched chain amino acids to fuel bodily requirements. So all of the BCAAs that you need are in your protein intake by definition if you're getting your protein from high quality sources, which means animal foods, typically like poultry, meat, fish, dairy, eggs.
I think I explained.
That's
good.
That's cool. So once I finish the pyramid with you, I want to understand from you. You're a data guy for sure. I see how easy you can communicate data and how you get I think people do not understand the amount of effort that you have to put in order to digest very dense information, because papers, they're not easy even to read. And to put it in a way that in 8 pictures, you can get it. And for me, you are one of the best writers. The amount of save posts that I have from you is outstanding. And I think you do that with such ease that I have to congratulate you from that. So once you are a person that is always looking into data, and you say that the scientific consensus takes too much in order to change, when was the last time you have changed your mind? And what was the data that made you do that?
That's a good question.
Well, first, thank you very much for your praise. That means a lot. As for the last time I changed my mind, that was relatively recently. It was actually on the P ratio debate. I had a huge debate with Eric Trexler and Greg Knuckles from Stronger by Science. And I was kind of in the position of not getting too fat during a bulk, because it might impair your P ratio when you're cutting. Now, after that, we looked at a lot of research, and my position was, okay, we don't have direct research showing impaired muscle growth, but we also don't have good research. And they said, well, based on the research we have, we don't see impaired muscle growth. And I said, well, we do see reductions in protein synthesis. We do see reductions in work capacity. We see increases in recovery times in obese individuals versus untrained individuals. So there are multiple lines of evidence essentially culminating in what I think could be a decrease in direct muscle growth. And after that, I actually came across some more papers, and there was a new study out just this year that I shared on my Instagram, where they looked at very big samples. And this was kind of hidden research, interestingly, where none of us had found this. And I looked at those. I also sent that to them, and I told them, well, actually, consider my position retracted, because these are large studies. These are exactly the studies that I told you I would want to see, and they did not find direct decreases in muscle growth. Interestingly, some of them did find decreases in strength development, and the new study, for some reason, found a decrease in fat loss, which makes no sense. Either way, it means that I was probably wrong about the idea that high body fat levels will impair muscle growth. That doesn't seem to be the case. My practical position, though, is still kind of the same, because even if we don't see decreases in muscle growth, if your recovery times increase, if strength development decreases, if we see decreases in muscle protein synthesis, my position is basically, why risk it? So don't go to that level. But in terms of the actual P ratio, they were probably correct that there is no effect on the direct P ratio of getting too fat during a bulk. Maybe if you get not even if you get really fat, because these studies, they were even in obese individuals, elderly individuals. Even then, there was no direct suppression of muscle growth. So that's something I was most likely wrong about.
But it's
getting a link with that. We recorded an episode, me and João, that talked about it was more the social side of nutrition and exercise and psychological side. So we even use a book called Cynical Theories, has an example that talk about fat studies, about queer theory, critical race theory, and how the speech right now, it's so liberal that sometimes science is debunked and you cannot use science, and science is somehow offensive. And getting a link with that, you can be obese and metabolic health, correct? There is even like an expression that you are like obese metabolic health. I don't know the expression, but you can see obese people with good blood exams, let's say.
Yes, it's called metabolically healthy obesity.
Perfect. That was the expression I was trying to find. But what is your take in how we're talking about obesity right now, and how magazines and media in general is trying to push the glamorization of obesity? Like, where do you stand when it comes to that?
There was a study on that I reviewed on my YouTube channel.
You know why I like you so much?
Ago.
You always start with, actually, there was a study on that.
That's the data we want,
it's
right?
Like my opinion is, no, it's actually, there is a study on that.
Yeah, and that will inform my opinion. So, I mean, I could just give you an opinion, but I wouldn't think it's worth much, you know? So, I want to tell you why I think what I think. And what this study found, and there's some previous research that hints at the same, that yes, if we start talking about obesity as more something that's genetic, something that is not so much under your control, like the 60-minute interview and the like, then it does reduce the stigma associated with obesity. And that can be a good thing. But what it also does is it decreases people's motivation to lose fat. And that, I think, is a very bad thing. Also for people themselves, because most people do want to become leaner. And when everyone tells them, oh, you don't have to be lean. And funny enough, it's mostly people that are already lean that tell other people that are not lean, like, it's okay, you know?
So true.
But they know deep down that why they are lean. They want to be lean because they look better, they feel better, they're healthy. Other people like leaner people more, even if it's sigma, maybe that shouldn't be there. It is how the world works. And then it's very easy for them to collect virtue points by saying, okay, yeah, well, I diet, I do all these things, I spent a lot of effort into that, but it's completely fine to be overweight, right? And when we're pushing the narrative like this, then you're not helping obese people. You're just collecting virtue signaling points to make it look like you're like the nice, tolerant individual, but you're not actually helping people, because you're not giving them options. You're not telling them how you can help them. And it is a fact that most people want to lose fat. So rather than just telling them like, you know, it's fine that you're overweight, you can say, I don't care that you're overweight. If somebody comes to me and they want to lose fat, then I tell them, okay, this is your goal. You want to lose fat. I understand. I'm going to help you how to do it. So I think a much more practical, concrete approach is a lot better for this, where we teach people how to get the physique that they want. And if they want to be overweight or they're obese, fine. You know, that's their prerogative. I'm not going to tell anyone like you should have a six-pack or something. But if you do want a six-pack, then I can help you get it. And here's how. That's basically my perspective.
That's cool. When it comes to training, I know you have a lot of knowledge, and
I know already
you probably heard about the whole full range of motion and the recent studies that were made when it comes to that, especially I think was at the bicep curl. I don't know if I'm wrong, like the shortened position, the length position. And I saw a lot of heat of people going for team room, full room
range of motion
with Mike Israetel, that is a big proponent of going for range of motion. And I want to understand your take on that, because I know you and Mike have talked like a lot of times, and a lot of the methodology do agree when it comes to your methodology and his methodology. So what's your take in terms of range of motion for hypertrophy training?
Yeah, I think a lot of people kind of misunderstood the recent findings, in that they don't say that you don't need full range of motion. They're just explaining why full range of motion is generally good for muscle growth and strength development. And that's because of stretch-mediated hypertrophy. Now, stretch-mediated hypertrophy basically is a phenomenon where we see greater muscle growth when muscles are trained at long lengths. Now, in the case of a squat or a bench press or a chin-up, it means you have to go all the way down. And that's what Team Full ROM, or full range of motion training in general, advocates, right? You use all the range of motion that you got. And the new research just basically confirms that. And the latest meta-analysis also finds that, in general, full range of motion training beats partial range of motion training for strength development and muscle growth. But there are certain exercises where a partial range of motion might be beneficial, or at least you don't need a full range of motion at the top. So you still want full range of motion at the bottom, you want a good stretch, but it may not matter to get full contraction. So we have a nice study by Trouxe et al. From 2021, where they looked at leg extensions, and they found that the bottom part is by far the most important because that's where you get stretch-mediated hypertrophy. And the top part might not be very necessary. And in this study, they even found, but it's the only study that has found this so far, greater muscle growth with the partial range of motion and the full range of motion group. Now, there are a couple reasons for that. It might be due to the leg extension machine. It might have been due to the training program. Either way, it's relatively premature to say that we should just skip full range of motion training altogether and we should just do all of our training in a stretch position, because most people recommend full range of motion training to get stretch-mediated hypertrophy. Like in a squat, when people tell you you need full ROM, you need to go all the way down, nobody is telling you, you need to go all the way up. People don't have an issue with going up.
That's true.
They have an issue with getting down low enough.
Yeah.
And that's exactly where you get stretch-mediated hypertrophy. So in that case, stretch-mediated hypertrophy and team full ROM are on the same team. And in most cases, that is the case. Now, there is some controversy currently whether, for certain exercises where that's not the case, where you don't get where increasing the range of motion does not emphasize the stretched position. Does it matter that you have full range of motion? Maybe not, but maybe it does. And usually there's very little to gain or to lose from using full range of motion. So as a good default position, I think training with full range of motion is good. And most people need to hear that they need to train with more range of motion. The vast majority of my clients, I have to tell them, you're not training with full range of motion. You need to go deeper. You need to fully extend the arm. You need to squat down lower. You need to get the bar all the way to your chest, And the new research just confirms that more and more. So in practice, I think full range of motion is still the best default. It's just that new research shows why full range of motion is superior. And maybe there are certain cases where, we want to focus mostly on the stretch position. And we want to keep in mind that is the most important thing rather than the full range of motion per se.
So that's a point that you and Mike clearly agree. Is there a point that you guys part ways in nutrition or exercise by the times that you talk to him? Like, okay, this is a point that we do not agree.
I think so, yeah. And when we're actually together, we don't talk a lot about nutrition and training because we actually
Really?
talk about a lot like politics, philosophy, a lot of other stuff where we agree on almost everything, interestingly. But in terms of nutrition and training, I would say we actually have quite a few topics where we agree to disagree. I think he likes more block periodization, changes in training volume across the mesocycle. And I keep things more static with smaller long-term adjustments rather than this volume cycling. And he also likes high carb diets more than I do. I'm more of the opinion that you don't need it. He's more like better safe than sorry, get your carbs in, fat's not so important. And I say, well, there is also some research that fat might be beneficial for muscle growth. So I think, erring more on getting enough fat and carbs not so important. He is kind of the opposite. So we agree on a lot of the big take-home messages. We're both strict proponents of good exercise technique, full range of motion being one of the criteria of that. And we agree with progressive overload. Even if you're training for size, you still want to develop strength. So a lot of these big points we agree on, but in the finer details, there are actually quite a few things where we don't agree on everything.
How would be your pyramid of training? Like we said, for nutrition, we have calories, macros, timing, like food composition and supplement. How would you construct your pyramid of training?
And percentage-wise, if you can say it.
Yeah, so it's difficult to assign a pyramid in particular can be difficult. I think you can get like a good overall picture, but I think a lot of people, when you give them a pyramid, they interpret it too narrowly. Because, for example, if somebody, I could say in general, how close to failure you train based on the research is not that important. in that you can compensate for not training to failure with doing more sets. So your proximity to failure is not that important directly in most research. Given the same total training volume, whether you train to failure or not, and at least you're going close to failure in both cases, doesn't influence muscle hypertrophy. But on the other hand, a lot of people don't go near failure. Yeah. So for a lot of people, the practical advice is they need to train harder. And they don't need to hear that you should not train to failure. They just need to hear you need to train harder. Like you're going like 10 reps to failure, okay? You have to, this is my warm-up set, what you're doing right now. So you just have to haul ass and train a lot harder, and you're gonna get, that's gonna overrule anything in terms of your micromanagement of how many sets you do and all these things. You just need to train harder, right? So that's in a case where, well, where then do we place proximity to failure? I would say, and in the population as a whole, it's actually quite high up. Like for a lot of people, like I said, training harder is the fastest way to better gains. But theoretically, it's not very important. Now, I think one of the only things where we can really agree it's by far the most important is training volume. Training volume for your training, that is like the equivalent of your energy intake. And then all of the other things, they matter mostly because they influence your training volume.
But when it comes to training volume, you still have like the time, the amount per muscle group, or no? Like, okay, this is the recommendation when it comes to that, but you said you keep it stable. You don't change it so much.
How can you be without that much time? Like, how can you be that stable for a period without making like progressive overload in volume, not intensity?
In weight. So you want to make the progressive overload in weight. I think that's something what Mike and I agree on for the most part, is that the best progressive overload is that in getting stronger. Like if you put 30% on your bench press while you're training for size, you're going to be bigger for sure. So the best way to implement progressive overload is that you see the weight on the bar is increasing over time.
Not and then the so much in volume.
Yes. So, well, it depends on how the total tonnage is going to go up. Right? Because you're lifting heavier weights. So the tonnage in terms of weights times reps times sets, that's going to be increasing. But your total number of reps that you do doesn't have to increase as long as you're doing the same workouts with more and more weight over time. And the most important metric of volume is sets per week per muscle group.
Perfect.
That is the most important measure that predicts muscle growth the best of pretty much any variable we have in a training program.
So don't you like make adjustments on the total volume per muscle group? Like where do you stand in the minimum and the higher end? You keep like in the middle of this range and keep just adding load?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for most people, I think the optimum training volume is going to be in the range of 10 to 30 sets per muscle group per week. And it differs a lot per individual. Like more advanced individuals, I go higher in volume. When someone's cutting, I don't go as high in volume as when they're bulking. And women can, in my experience, go a little bit higher in volume than men. So there are a lot of factors that determine where exactly in the spectrum you lie. And you start with an estimate of what likely is the optimum volume based on the scientific research, based on what we know about this individual, based on, say, a new client that I have. And then I'm going to be at, well, say 18 sets per muscle group per week. Then I'm going to look at how are they doing? How are they progressing? I'm not going to make any changes until I see their progression. If I see that they're progressing very well, then I'm probably not going to make major changes. Maybe I'll try to increase the volume a little bit, especially if I see that work capacity is high. Work capacity is, I think, a good indicator you can look at. So you can see if their repetitions go like 10, 10, 9, 9. That means that their fatigue index, or like the total amount of neuromuscular fatigue, is not high, because their repetitions are barely decreasing. They're not very fatigued, evidently, from the workout. So that's an indication, okay, maybe we can add some volume and get even better results. On the other hand, if they are progressing very poorly, and I see, for example, that every time after their rest day is the only time they progress, but then later in the week they always plateau. Well, that's an indication, probably the volume is too high, they're not recovering between those sessions, and they need that extra rest day to recover. So then I'm going to decrease the volume, and I'm going to look again the next week or 2 weeks. How are they progressing? Is their strength development better now? Is it worse? And based on that, again, we keep making small changes. And over time, the idea is that we find for this individual the optimum training volume. And then in principle, when you're there, you only need very small changes. Like when somebody gets more advanced, for example, you need to increase it. When they go from a bulk to a cut, you probably want to decrease it. But the muscle tissue largely stays the same. So given that all the goals are the same, there's still an energy surplus, etc., I don't think it makes sense to change the volume, like to just for the sake of it.
Like going from 10 to 12 total sets in a week and finish your cycle like near 20, 24 sets, you are more likely to go, let's stay, just an example, let's stay for 15, 18 total sets, keep that the same and try to build like load throughout the weeks until you feel like that you cannot progress. And once you hit that spot, do you believe in a deload? How do you deal with the, like, okay, let's manage the fatigue accumulation to keep progressing again?
So I think progression should guide everything. As long as progress is good, don't fix what isn't broken. If progress is not good, you have to update the program. You don't wait a month, you update it now, because you can see you're not getting results. And if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same results. So progress is always the leading factor. In terms of deloads, I'm a big fan of reactive deloads rather than planned proactive deloads. So rather than take like a week off after every X weeks, I usually give my clients a rule that if their performance is a lot worse during a workout than expected, so for example, if your repetitions go down rather than up, then that's an indication you're probably fatigued, because I push my volume a lot and it's much more likely that they're overtraining than they're undertraining. So maybe they didn't sleep that well, maybe the last workout they really had to go super close to failure, more than usual. For some reason, they may be over fatigued, and then I tell them, okay, that exercise, we're going to skip the remaining sets and we're just going to do speed work, because that still builds good technique, it still develops the nervous system, but it induces very little muscular fatigue.
I remember seeing somewhere that you do not take off days, is that right? Or that you had a phase that you would work like basically every day you would work out. Like, how does that go and why you don't believe in that?
Yeah, I mean, if I work out every day, then I still have a 23-to-1 ratio of work to rest. 23 hours of the day I am recovering, 1 hour of the day I'm training. So there's no need to make that rest interval a calendar day. You know, I think a lot of people, they're looking at everything from the lens of the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar we use. So we think of things as like 7 day a week, you know, training volume per week. And we think of training workouts as being like in a 24-hour cycle, what we consider a day. And there's no reason that your physiology responds to the rotation of the earthly bodies, you know, the earth going around the sun and the earth turning and the like. What happens in the muscle tissue is not related to these things. So it's just a matter of total time and a certain amount of volume that you accumulate in a week. And if you think about it, even the thing with training frequency and a rest interval, we call it a rest interval when it's 5 minutes, but when we're talking about a day, we call it training frequency. Or when we talk about a few hours, we say that you train twice a day, for example. We don't say you have a 4-hour rest interval. So that's just the way we talk about it. But what the body registers is just mechanical tension at certain time intervals, and it responds mostly to the total amount of tension accumulated over a certain time period.
So now that the interview is reaching the end, I feel that we know each other better. I want you to be the referee between an argument that I had with João, and he's going to explain to you the reps in reserve and how it happened, because it was the first time that I faced it. And then I start asking myself, am I training wrong this whole time? Because what happened is, even though I'm more like you, I do not like messing up with sets or reps. I'm not good at it. So in order for me not to mess up, I know I'm increasing weight. I keep the sets, I keep the reps. And João is much more like, okay, I did that, so I'm going to do that. He's very like Mike's right when it comes to that.
I'm just like, I adjust the numbers of set and
reps sometimes.
My reps.
And weight.
Yeah.
And I'm basically sticking to 8 when it comes to increments. But what happened is from week 1 to week 2, I'm going to keep, like, if I did 4 of 10 of, let's say, Bulgarian squats, I'm going to keep 4 of 10 in the other training. And 225 is going to be 230 or 235. That's it. By the end is the only time that I'm going to be honest to you that I'm reaching like, instead of 10, 9. But I'm a former CrossFitter, so I'm good when it comes to mental toughness of reaching 10. And like, if I have to screen in the middle of the gym, I'm going to screen and do the 10 reps. So I want to understand. John's going to explain what happened and you give your verdict, okay?
So the thing was, I was trying to explain him that if he keeps the same rep range throughout the sets, so if you have like 4 sets and you are trying to reach, let's say you are in the beginning of the mesocycle, because he doesn't change the numbers of sets and the weights.
The weights I change.
Not the weights, sorry, the numbers of sets and reps. He does change the reps in reserve. So he tries to begin in the first weight. He increased the reps in reserve, the intensity of the workout. So if he doesn't change, I told him, if you're not like diminishing your numbers of reps throughout the sets, that means that your reps in reserve are worsen throughout the set. Like if you keep 15 and you estimate your reps in reserve like 2 in your first set, and you said that you are 2 reps in reserve in your last set, but you kept 15 reps, that's not 2 reps in reserve in your first set.
But I feel like it is.
But
like
you should accumulate fatigue throughout the sets and diminishing as long.
But that does not happen to me.
Yeah.
So am I training wrong? Is João facing it in a different way? Like, you can be honest.
Joao is right in that your repetitions in reserve are decreasing.
I don't like that.
In the training side, man, if it was nutrition-wise, I told him that I read on the scientific hypertrophy principles of Dr. Michael Heitel that he fucking wrote that. I read the book.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you're training wrong.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing can still be a viable way to progress. I call that set.
Totally, I told him that.
Yeah, so you can do that, and it works super well for strength development in particular, because for strength development you probably don't want to go super close to failure all the time, if that's a primary goal. It can also work well for muscle growth, because if your last set is truly like your 10 RM, which is like you have no reps in reserve, then your first set is not going to be too far off from that. If your work capacity is good, maybe it's like you said, 3-4 repetitions in reserve, that's close enough that the set is still meaningful. And then every set that you do extra is going to be closer and closer to failure, so they're going to be harder. And if you don't notice much of a difference between the first and the last set, that is an indication that your work capacity is very high. So that's what I mean when someone's reps go like 10, 10, 10, 10. That means that you don't suffer that much neuromuscular fatigue from a set as Joao might suffer. And that's an indication you probably respond well to very intensive training. Now, there are also a lot of other factors that go into this. Yeah. Okay.
You're going to become a good powerlifter.
Observation.
Okay, so you were nice when it comes to the answer. And now, just to finish, aside from fitness, what are the go-to when it comes to reading, listening, podcasts? Like, what's around your mind lately?
I love Chris Williamson's Modern Wisdom podcast. So I'm not a big fan of anything that's not scientifically referenced, because I spend so much time that I have to spend on reading scientific literature. And I actually have an education in behavioral economics, so I also read psychological literature, some economical findings. And I'm so close to the data, you know, like I like to see the data myself, look at the papers. So a lot of the work that I consume, whether it's via podcasts or anything, is usually of people that are also close to the data. But yeah, I like that one a lot. I'm getting more into YouTube and podcasts in general, because it's a very easy way to digest information. So sometimes when you're tired, you don't want to, spit through a scientific paper and do calculations yourself. You just want to absorb information and reflect on it, and it can go through your head, and later you can think on it in more detail. So I like that a lot. And in terms of reading, like I said, I'm very much close to the science, and I like a lot of psychology, some economical findings. lifestyle advice, productivity advice, I also like. And that's pretty much it. I'm very narrow in my focus. And kickboxing videos, because I got into kickboxing not too long ago. So I also like to watch kickboxing and there isn't as much science. So I'm much more looking at like what world champions recommend and the like.
So in terms of a book, a movie, or a series that you could recommend people?
The series I watched last, well, this is going to be very much a guy recommendation.
Okay.
But it's the Terminal List. If you like sort of good B movies, war movies, the Terminal List is really awesome, I think. I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. Movie recommendation, recently, what's the name? Don't remember what the name of the movie is. It was by Ridley Scott. So I'll recommend the director. Ridley Scott is generally quite good. He has a lot of movies. And then last book, one of the last books I read was what's it called? It's very famous. Israeli professor, The History of Mankind, The History of Human.
Homo sapiens.
It's like
Homo God.
Homo sapiens. Yeah, Sapiens is the title.
Oh, yeah.
I like it.
Yeah, that's a great book.
That's good. Awesome. I read that.
Menos, I cannot thank you enough for taking this time and being so kind to us. Eu vou terminar em português, porque eu sei que você vai conseguir entender. Eu agradeço muito, tanto eu quanto o João. Somos incrivelmente fãs do seu trabalho e de tudo que você tem mostrado e na facilidade como você consegue colocar uma informação tão densa, de fácil acesso para tantas pessoas. Você é uma inspiração não só como um cientista, mas como também alguém que coloca sua mão no fogo e que mostra que mesmo uma pessoa altamente educada, com conhecimento, pode ter um corpo ótimo, uma saúde ótima e colocar tudo isso em conjunto de uma forma fácil e de fácil consumo também. Então, agradeço muito a sua participação.
O prazer foi meu.
Thank you so much, Menno.
Galera, foi isso. Falamos com o Menno. Espero que você tenha gostado. Você viu aí surra de ciência. Eu quero que você entre e olhe as fotos dele, porque além disso ele vai te dar uma surra de boa forma física. E se você gostou desse episódio, compartilha, porque o João tá muito aqui, coração aberto, tentando fazer um bom trabalho para você. Valeu, galera!